Hello, this is Lucille, and you are about to listen to the very first episode of Horrors for Horror, where we talk about Tabs' favorite horror movie, The Thing, from 1982. Just wanted to preface this episode with a couple of things. This episode does contain discussions of body horror, gore, animal death, and suicide. So please listen to this at your own risk. I also want to state that while this is the first episode of the show, we talk about this movie for a while. So this is kind of a long episode, and I couldn't quite figure out how I wanted to cut it down. So I apologize for the length of it. We'll try to keep the episodes a bit shorter than over an hour and a half in the future. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy.
Welcome to Horrors for Horror, where three friends get together and discuss what we've been watching in the world of horror. I'm Tabs.
I'm Lucy.
And I'm Will.
And today we're going to be discussing the 1982 directed by John Carpenter movie, The Thing, which is my favorite horror movie. And I think... honestly, it's probably not even just like my favorite horror movie. I think it's my favorite movie.
It's a good one,
or at least up there.
Yeah, it's good
because I think it's wild to me to think about how when it first came out, it was like a fucking disaster. Of like, it was criticized as like an instant junk, and Cine Fantastique, which was like a film magazine, said it was like the most hated film. It was like a wretched excess, and
oh my god,
like,
what the
Jesus
fuck?
Christ!
Like, a lot of people think that the reason why it was sort of hated was because it came out around the time that E.T. had also came out, which was a far more optimistic take on aliens visiting Earth than The Thing. And so a lot of people think that the competition between those two, where also like during the summer of 1982 there was a recession, there was a lot of other like social and political things going on during the early 80s. And so you have E.T., the extraterrestrial, who is, you know, this movie that's very optimistic and, you know, like, oh, aliens, yeah. And there was like also a lot of other successful science fiction and fantasy films that came out.
Star
and then you
Wars.
have The Thing.
You have The Thing,
is...
where everyone hates each other during it, and the most disgusting bodies you'll ever fucking see.
Exactly. You have The Thing, which
gross.
is this nihilistic movie that is just, it's not a happy movie.
It feels like everyone wants to fucking Bart strangle and everyone in the set at all times.
Exactly. Like,
Yeah, it was probably like really fucking cold, like while making it too. So that's not even just like in the movie. Like John Carpenter like kept the set like really cold, I think.
Oh my
yes,
god.
yeah. In fact, yeah, he kept it. I believe at like 30 degrees inside the studio or something around there.
God.
It was very cold. And then as opposed to what was happening on the outside, because obviously a lot of the filming, this was John Carpenter's first studio, like in-studio film, and so they would take place on refrigerated sets in Los Angeles, which, so you would be freezing on the inside of, you know, this refrigerated set to very cold temperatures, and then on the outside it would be like 100 degrees.
Oh my god, that had to be like fucking whiplash.
Yeah,
At least like if you ever needed like anything warm, you could literally just step outside and
exactly.
Yeah,
if you were feeling too cold. And then also, of course, they also filmed in Juneau, Alaska, and then a place in British Columbia, which would get extremely cold, and they spent a good amount of their budget on just heating the actors, which, by the way, the budget was $15 million,
15.
and the box office was $19.6 million.
Oh,
so
how fuck!
they barely made back their budget.
Oh my god!
Holy
God.
1.5 million. Yeah. Another reason why this movie is sort of nowadays is praised and stuff is for its effects.
Yes.
Primarily its creature effects, which was 1.5 million of the budget was spent on that. And
1.5?
Yeah, and the effects were created by Rob Bottin, I believe is how you say his name, who was only 22 years old when he started.
Oh my god!
And
these effects are
Yeah.
like some of the best shit I've ever seen.
It's fucking insane.
yeah, and he was 22 years old, and apparently, according to the making of documentary, his schedule was so intense and punishing, because his attention to detail was so precise and stuff, that after filming had finished, he was hospitalized with exhaustion and pneumonia.
What?
So he
Oh
had
my God.
literally made himself sick working on this movie. And yeah, so a lot of the stuff that he used for the creature effects was a mixture of chemicals, food products, rubber, and then also mechanical parts and
Holy
sort of
shit.
puppetry that his large team were able to make so that the thing could be something that could be capable of taking on any form. And then Rob Bottin was later on, he worked on designing and building special effects for Total Recall, which he then later won a Special Achievement Academy Award for. But yeah, so he's also worked on RoboCop, Total Recall, Basic Instinct.
Shout out to Total Recall. I love Total Recall. That movie's a ton of fun.
We should
Yeah, and
we should watch it sometime.
We should. It's not a horror movie, but
it kind of fits in that sort of
I'd say
vibe of-
out of the two, I'd say RoboCop is much more of a horror film than Total Recall. I mean, the
Interesting.
effects in it are crazy. At the beginning of the film, you have Arnold Schwarzenegger's face caving in on itself and exploding. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But yeah, so that's a little bit about sort of the pre-movie. Let's get into the actual movie.
Yeah.
So we open up to the space, to the space, it's space, not this space.
It is
We open
the
up
only
to-
thing in space.
It is the
This
only
is
thing in
space.
space.
This one shot, this one panning shot going to Earth.
This is the actually only footage we have of space. I don't know how John Carpenter was able to get that.
Stanley Kubrick faked the moon landing, but John Carpenter actually got footage.
Exactly. No, so we open up to this spaceship, alien sort of looking spaceship crash landing into America, specifically what the fuck is it called? Antarctica.
Yeah. Where does this movie take place?
I don't know. Fucking. I just completely forgot.
Takes place in Alaska, right?
Yeah, just please, wherever.
Wait, you're telling me this isn't Maine?
Wait, you telling me this isn't in the middle of the ocean?
Bro, this isn't Swallow Falls.
Listen, global warming is so bad that I just completely forgot Antarctica existed. No. So anyway, yeah. So a alien spaceship crash lands into Antarctica, and then we have a the title card
and the opening credits. And I want to bring up a couple things of these opening credits, if you will, please. So the score was done by Ennio Morricone, who has composed 393 films.
Damn.
Yes.
He is most known for he does the thing. He is most known. He did the from Good, Bad, and the Ugly. He did The Hateful Eight.
Which about The Hateful Eight. Sorry to interrupt, but there was unused music that he had for this film, that he later used in The Hateful Eight, and ironically, when this film came out, obviously, like as we said, it was not well liked by critics and everybody, and so he was nominated for a Razzie Award for worst score for this movie. But when he composed for The Hateful Eight and he used some unused music, he won an Oscar for The Hateful Eight, which I just think is really funny and kind of also describes how everyone has viewed this film over the years. Is that at first, obviously, not a lot of people liked it, and now it's kind of viewed as like one of the best films ever.
Yeah.
He's done a lot of stuff. Like he's done a lot of westerns, but he's also, because he's Italian, he's also done a lot of Italian films. Like he's done some score for some Argento films. He did the score for Salo, which we're never gonna watch on the podcast. I can guarantee that. But
fuck
also
you
John
if you
Carpenter
think you're gonna
did
watch
part of the
this
score. But I want to give a shout to the cinematographer of this film, Dean Cundy, who has the most insane cinematography thing I've ever seen. So, as you know, he shot The Thing. He also shot Jurassic Park, Halloween 1, 2, and 3, Back to the Future 1, 2, and 3, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Apollo 13, Big Trouble in Little China, a lot of other John Carpenter films like The Fog and Escape from New York. He also shot Camp Rock, Garfield the Movie, Flubber, Jack and Jill, Roadhouse, The Flintstones, Home Again, The Spy Next Door, Scooby-Doo Curse of the Lake Monster, and Looney Tunes Back in Action.
What the fuck?
Oh
what is
this man's cinematography game is insane, dude.
Oh my god, he gets around!
You look at The Thing and the Jack and Jill, and you're like, yeah, same fucking shit, dude.
Yeah, this is made by the same guy.
Yeah,
Shot by the same guy.
This guy is automatically like in my top of all time because he shot Looney Tunes Back in Action. That's like one of the best things that humanity has ever created in terms of cinema, and I am fully standing by this. So he's cool. But
So
God,
true,
like
that's
literally,
right.
I was looking that up. I'm like, what else has Dean Cundy done? I'm like, oh, he shot some good stuff. I'm gonna click on
he's
more.
done
I first see
everything.
Camp Rock, and I'm like, what the fuck?
Camp Rock. That's, oh my god! Imagine working with the guy who shot like your Demi Lovato or a Jonas Brother, and like, you know, you're filming your funny little Camp Rock movie, and meanwhile the guy who's like directing cinematography is the fucking person who worked on The Thing.
Yeah.
Like, what a tonal shift.
He also
What
has
is The Thing
directed
in simile-
one film. And that film was Honey, We Shrunk Ourselves,
Yeah.
which is the third film in the Honey, I Shrunk the Kids series.
The title card shows up, which was this very cool animation cell that has like The Thing written on it. It was so in order to create the title card, it was a animation cell with The Thing written on it that was placed behind a smoke-filled fish tank, which was then covered with a plastic garbage bag, and then the bag was set on fire, and then it created the effect of the title burning onto the screen.
That's really cool.
That's fucking
Yeah.
sick.
And then we get, you know, like the credits and everything, and then as we're sort of panning over Antarctica, we see this sled dog, running, and is being pursued by a helicopter, And you're like, wow, that's weird. And then they start shooting at the dog. And it's like, hey, wait a fucking second. Why are we shooting at this dog? What the dog doing?
What the dog doing?
What the dog doing?
What the fucking dog doing? What he doing?
What are you doing? Was he the one who shot JFK?
Confirmed.
Oh my god!
So the dog starts running to an American research station, and the Americans all come out as they see this helicopter coming up to their station, and they're like, what the hell? And it lands, and one of the Norwegian passengers of that helicopter like pulls out a grenade and goes to throw it at the dog, but he accidentally, in a wacky little funny thing, throws the grenade behind him.
It's like Wii Sports Bowling.
Yeah, like Wii Sports Bowling, into very deep snow, and it gets lost in the snow, and as he's running away, the other sort of like I believe pilot of that helicopter is like searching for the grenade, and that blows up the helicopter, and he blows up, and the other Norwegian starts like running after the dog, and the dog starts running to the Americans who have all come out, and he's like shooting at the dog, and he's shouting at the Americans in Norwegian. And fun fact, he is actually speaking Norwegian, but it is never subtitled in any of the movies, or any versions of the movies. But what he is saying is, get the hell away. It's not a dog. That's not a dog. It's imitating a dog. So he's essentially like spoiling the movie.
Dude,
within...
what is the not dog doing?
What is the not dog doing?
What's the imitation dog doing?
What the imitation doing? What the imposter doing?
And so he starts shooting at the dog. Fun fact too, the dog. So the dog is played by a good boy named Jed. Who was actually from the Pacific Northwest, like me. I know him actually. We go on, coffee. We go on coffee dates all the time.
I give him like one of those doggy Sundays from Shake Shack.
Have you ever talked to him about what it was like to work with Kurt Russell?
Yeah, he's always said Kurt Russell's such a great guy. No, but so the dog's name was Jed. This dog actor also worked on White Fang. He played White Fang in those movies. He was a half wolf, half Malamute. And he was just a good boy. He's very cute. It's really hard to watch this movie every time because you're like, oh, look at this cute puppy. I hope nothing bad happens to this dog. And when which reminder, like, this is a half wolf. This is a huge ass dog. He runs up to, I believe it is, I can't remember.
I think he runs up to the doctor.
Peter Maloney. He runs up to Peter Maloney, who plays Bennings.
Bennings, yes.
Yeah, and Peter Maloney was afraid of dogs, actually, and found it difficult doing this scene where a giant half-wolf dog is running at him and jumping up onto him. Which I can imagine was probably terrifying. So the Norwegian keeps like yelling and trying to shoot at the dog, which is he's now shooting at the Americans. But he is shot in self-defense by the station commander, Gary, who is played by Donald Moffat, who was, along with The Thing, he was eventually in The Right Stuff, and then I believe he was like a on and off Broadway person, mostly.
He apparently had a Tony nom. He has like 2 Tony noms.
Yeah, so he was.
Damn.
Yeah, So the Norwegian is shot and is killed. He's shot in the eye, and we get this cool little like view of what like he looks like. And then we're introduced kind of properly to Kurt Russell's character, R.J. McCready, who is the helicopter pilot for this research. We never are told why they are in Antarctica.
I don't think we really need to know, personally.
We don't need to know, but it is funny to think about how there are so many, like, horror movies that are like, yeah, we have to explain, like, every little tiny bit of backstory or something like that. And then in this movie, they're just like, it's just a bunch of dudes hanging out being guys.
Just guys
in
being
Antarctica.
dudes.
Just guys be dudes.
Which extended to not only the cast of characters, which is a cast of 15 characters, that extended to the crew as well. There was the only female presence in this film is the voice at the beginning. McCready is playing chess on a computer.
He fucks up this computer. This computer...
He gets yeah.
This computer cheats, and he has so much... He pours his entire glass of whiskey into it and just fucks up this computer.
And that... The voice of that was played by John Carpenter's then wife. Fun fact.
Is that Deborah Hill?
No, it was...
No, Deborah Hill isn't John Carpenter's wife. Who?
Adrienne Barbeau.
Adrienne Barbeau, yes.
At the time, was his wife.
Yeah.
And she plays, the voice of the person he's playing against on chess.
Deborah Hill is not married to John Carpenter. She just worked with John Carpenter for gore.
She worked with him a lot. But, and then according to John Carpenter, there was originally one crew member who was female, but she was pregnant, and so that kind of like had to like force her to leave production, and she was replaced by a male. So literally, there is like 2 times, because there's at the start where they are playing chess, and you get the voice of her, and then later on there's a game show and you can hear like contestants on there. And that is the only time there is any female presence in this movie.
The ultimate dudes rock movie.
This is the ultimate dude rock
This
movie.
would be like homoerotic if like everyone didn't hate each other.
You're telling me that it can't be homoerotic if everyone hating each other?
You know, this is the ultimate enemies to lover movie, actually.
Yeah.
It really is.
At the end of the film, Keith David's character, Childs, and R.J. McCready, they at the end of the film they both fall in love, and after the film ends, they just when it cuts they have gay sex, and that's how the movie ends. But we don't see it.
Awesome.
Well, yeah. Spoiler. I mean, no. So we get introduced to sort of everybody as well. We have, as we said, Kurt Russell playing R.J. McCready, and Peter Maloney playing George Bennings, and Donald Moffat playing Gary. We also have A. Wilford Brimley playing Blair, who is I believe he's a
doctor.
He's the doctor. We have D.K. Carter playing Knowles.
Knowles is the coolest. The first time we see him, he's roller skating around this entire thing.
Yeah.
The next time we see him, he's roller skating around playing Stevie Wonder music. He rules.
Mm-hmm. And then we have David Clennon playing Palmer. Knowles is the cook, I believe. Mm-hmm. And then Palmer is a engineer, I believe. Then we have Keith David, who, fun fact, this is Keith David's first credited film role, which is funny to think about because Keith David, fun fact, has over 300 roles across film, stage, television, and other media. He's been in everything.
He's in this. I most recognize him from he plays the cat in Coraline.
Yes, he also plays Dr. Facilier
in Princess and the
in
Frog.
Princess and the Frog. He plays the Flame King in Adventure Time. He does a lot of voice acting.
He has a very good voice.
Yeah, he does a lot of voice acting in like both like cartoons and other things, as well as video games. Like
he's
plays,
won
Al
3
Simmons.
Emmys. And the thing is, the funniest thing is, all 3 of them were for voiceover and narration stuff.
Yeah, he's extremely talented, and it's funny to think that like this is sort of where he got his start. Because he also does an amazing job in this movie.
Yeah.
And I believe he is also an engineer, I think.
Hell yeah.
And then we have Richard Dysart as Dr. Cooper, who Dr. Cooper also has a piercing, and they never just like, he just like has a fucking like nose piercing. And he so he's like sort of the physician, whereas Blair, I believe, is more of like the head sort of scientist type of doctor. And then we have a few more engineers, Norris, Clark, and Fuchs. They don't get as many moments in the film, but they're still pretty there, and they do add to this movie. And then we have Thomas Waits as Windows, who, fun fact, apparently just like showed up to set one day and was like, "Call me Windows." And then everybody was like, "Okay." And
it's like, hey,
also
call me
throughout the
this like
movie-
completely random ass fucking thing.
Yeah, also throughout the movie they call Kurt Russell's character Mac, and so you have these 2 characters named Mac and Windows, which obviously nowadays everyone's going to think about the company's Mac and Windows, but that's complete coincidence. Those 2 companies were not founded in 1981, 1982. But
those I've never heard of them in my life.
Yeah, I've never heard of them in my life. I've never heard of Mac
what the
and
fuck
Windows.
is the only Mac I know is mac and cheese.
The only Mac I know is RJ MacReady, played by Kurt Russell in The Thing.
The only Mac I know is Mac from is there a character named Mac in It's Always Sunny? I forgot.
Yes, I think so. Yes.
Yes. Rob. I don't know his name. I don't know how to pronounce his name. That character. Yes. Him.
Yeah.
The gay man.
The gay man. Yes, I was gonna say he becomes gay. Becomes
love
gay.
It's Always Sunny.
But anyway, so we get sort of introduced to everybody, and Gary, who is the station commander, sort of along with Blair, sort of are like, hey, we need to go investigate like the Norwegian base, because Windows had also, who is the communications officer, he says early on that he's not been able to get in contact with anybody for 2 weeks, I believe. And so there is this whole like thing of like, well, we need to get in contact because there's this like horrible storm happening as well. Like conditions are bad in Antarctica, but I guess they're worse now. And so RJ MacReady, Mac, and Dr. Copper go to investigate the Norwegian base, and it's empty. Mac keeps referring to them as Swedes and Swedish people for some reason, and has to keep being corrected like, no, they're Norwegians, Mac. Like, dude, come on. And the whole sort of like place is abandoned. There's at one point you see a fire axe like lodged in a wall, and then they come across a frozen corpse that is of a person who had killed themselves. by like slicing their wrists and neck, and this is the first sort of time you see like really in detail, because you see like a couple burnt corpses and stuff beforehand, but in this moment you see this very like detailed like dead body.
It is really disturbing.
It is very disturbing. The blood from him has like frozen in place like mid drop.
Yeah.
And he's still like sort of he has like his mouth open in sort of anguish. And they're kind of just like, all right, cool. And
all right, that's fucked up anyways.
They're like, oh, that's kind of fucked up anyways, and then they continue on investigating.
Ooh, owie, that looks like it hurts. Anyway.
Ouchie, ouchie.
Anyway, they come across this malformed body, like humanoid body. It's like two people like morphed together.
It's like inside this like giant tub thing, right? Or
no, so they see this outside.
Yeah.
They see this outside, and then they kind of go in and investigate more and stuff. And that's when they find this giant
forbidden
tub,
jacuzzi.
The forbidden jacuzzi.
Yeah.
And they're like, what the fuck is this? And essentially, they're like, what the fuck? And they take back this malformed body back to the American station, along with like their like the Norwegian sort of like research, I guess.
Yeah. At which point, when they started looking at the corpse a bit more, I wrote down in my notes that this is the nastiest corpse I've ever seen, and I still stand by this.
Which,
this
fun
is
fact,
disgusting. It's like...
Yes.
They're like... every limb is contorted. Its face is splitting apart and like molded together. It looks like a fucking Foogly from Spy Kids.
Yes.
Wait,
oh my
what?
God, yes.
Do you mean the thumb guys?
No, like the Flooglies. Like the little creep... Like other people that he has... Where like he like draws something and like scans it and it fucks up their face.
Yeah, like it's all stretched out. It's like contorted. And Blair, played by Wilford Brimley, who was like he was a veteran. I believe he was in the Marine Corps during the Korean War. So he was a sergeant. And according to the DVD commentary, John Carpenter said that he was the only cast member, Wilford Brimley was the only cast member not made squeamish by this autopsy scene, in which they used real animal organs. Which
you could tell.
Yeah.
It looks disgusting. It's disgusting.
It looks disgusting. Blair, as he's like doing this autopsy, he notes that all of the organs inside are human, like normal set of human organs, which kind of leads to this thing of like, well, this was human at one point. How the fuck was this human? It's completely like fucked up and doesn't look human. How the hell was this human?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And throughout this kind of time, the dog that we saw at the beginning has sort of been walking around the base.
What the fuck is this dog doing?
The doggy is just having a good time. At one point, it looks... I'm not entirely sure if we just, like, saw this differently, but at one point, it looked like he was just standing on some desks as Mac and Copper come back from the Norwegian base, and he's, like, looking...
It's two shots. He's standing up on this table looking out this window.
Yeah, he likes to be tall. He likes to be tall.
Big and tall.
So Clark, there is at one point the dog goes into this
Clark's
room,
right?
We don't know, because all we see is a silhouetted person.
Yeah.
We don't see anything that could identify him as any person that we have seen previously. And so the dog kind of just like goes into that room and it fades to black. And then eventually Clark, played by Richard Masur, I think is how you say his name, who has been in he was Stanley in the original 1990 miniseries for It.
Ooh.
Wow.
So he's done a good amount of acting credits and everything. Just like looking at his Wikipedia page, he has a lot. So he kennels the dog, and the dog kind of like slowly walks in, and there's other dogs in this kennels, and all the other dogs are like, yo, what the fuck? What the fuck is wrong with, like, what the fuck is this? Who is this? And they start growling, and they start barking. And so far, this doggy is just, like, chilling. He's not doing much. But then he starts shaking. And it's like, oh, no, what's wrong with the dog? And he starts shaking, and then his face just splits open.
Yeah, as a dog does.
As a doggy do. And his tongue lashes out, and it starts, like, it becomes this tentacle sort of thing. And it starts, like, waving all around the fucking room, and all the dogs are going crazy. And
there's, like, little other, like, things, like, shaking out of its back.
It starts, stuff starts, like, coming out of it. It starts, like, spitting this, like, liquid. I don't know how to describe it.
Yeah.
It's gross. That's how you can describe this movie and its special effects. It's gross.
It's grody.
It's
one thing that I'd love to point out is actually the score and the almost lack thereof, and is like normally that's not to be like, oh, there is no scoring for this film. The score up to this point has been just the same synth note, like, over and over again. But the thing is, which may on its surface just be like, what the fuck is this? It is haunting. It seeps in throughout this film constantly.
There is also this sort of howling wind, which was achieved by just stepping outside and recording I think Santa Ana or California winds, and there's just this very haunting winds, and something that I really do love about this movie is that it has these like quiet and almost boring, but not in a bad way, sort of moments where it's really just quiet and there's nothing really going on. Like when the dog first enters the kennels, before that there wasn't really a lot. Like, they found like these dead bodies, but like we were saying, they were sort of blasé and ambivalent. And then during like the autopsy scene, it was very like sterile and kind of like how an autopsy is. You know, you don't have like these big huge reactions of like, oh, that's really gross. Like obviously the biologist wouldn't be like, oh, it's so gross and yucky while doing an autopsy. You know, they're a professional. And so you go throughout this like movie where there's these sort of like low moments where not a lot is happening, but not like the way it is acted and sort of portrayed on scene, along with like the sound, is that it's just tense and anxiety inducing.
And I especially bring that up with this scene because the score just cuts. There is no scoring to this scene whatsoever. And normally in another in like a bigger film or like a different film, like it would be this like really intense synth score, just like bam, bam, bam. Like I'm specifically kind of imagining like in a different film, like this would be like some like It Follows style score where it's like this distorted synth going off during the scene, but there's nothing. There is no sound whatsoever except the vibrating of all like of the dogs and just the barking, and there is nothing else. You
hear all the whining, which sound editor Colin C. Watt or Moat. I'm so sorry if I'm butchering these names. He achieved these, like, the cries that the dogs have by rounding up all the neighborhood dogs, placing them in his house, and furtively stalking around in a dark trench coat with the collar taped up while tapping on the windows and rattling the doors to, like, get the dogs to bark and whine.
Oh my God,
which
dude.
is just very funny to think about. Those poor puppies, I hope they got treats and pets and everything afterwards, but it's so funny to just think about, like, this guy just walking around his house tapping on all the windows with, like, a microphone recording all the dogs whining. Yeah, so this, you hear, like, all this barking and everything, and McCready kind of hears this from wherever he is at, and it causes everyone, he pulls, like, the fire alarm, and he tells everybody to get to the kennels, and everyone walks in on just this monstrosity of something that vaguely looks like a dog, but is very much not a dog. It is, like, hairless, it's wet, it's, like, laying on the ground, just, like,
when
kind
they
of,
start
like,
to look at it, it just, like, it just reaches up arms and just grabs the ceiling and pulls itself up into it.
Yeah, it pulls itself up into it. And McCready, like, had told Childs to run and get the flamethrower, which, by the way, again, this is a group of scientists and they're doing research. Why do they have flamethrowers?
And they're in Antarctica.
Yeah, they're in Antarctica, and they also later on showed, like, they have all these guns and stuff
And
too. Like, and it's like, why do
explosives.
they have these things? You guys are doing science. But anyway, they burn the creature.
Can I, like, talk about how this creature is designed, where it has, like, eyes all over its fucking body? Like,
Yes.
like, I think there's, like, a huge ass, like, there's, like, this weird flower, like, open up, like a Venus flytrap thing that, like...
Yeah, it, honestly, like, it's hard to describe what the thing looks like, because it is just, imagine just, like, a dog that is just fucked up and bad. It's bad, like, because it's...
Imagine a dog that is that has had its shit rocked, dude.
It doesn't look good. Like, it looks it's like, you can still see, like, the muzzle of the dog and the, like, I'm looking at a photo, you can still see, like, you know, the sort of, like, face of a dog, but the rest is just this sort of, like, conglomerate of limbs and blood and yucky.
It is, like, it's like the epitome of Uncanny Valley.
Yeah. And it very much is, I think, a thing. You can't really, it is just so alien looking and bad. So they immediately incinerate the creature, and Blair autopsies it because, like, what the fuck is this thing? And he goes on to explain that this creature can imitate other organisms perfectly, down to sort of a, like, molecule level. And they then sort of spend the next few times, like, Clark is taking care of the other, like, Clark and Blair are taking care of the other dogs. That is when it sort of starts happening of this sort of, like, who the fuck is the thing? Because they've sort of figured out that this alien can perfectly copy something else, and insert it in, like, perfectly insert itself into the day-to-day sort of go-arounds, that when Clark and I think Blair or someone else are taking care of the other surviving dogs, Blair like starts staring at Clark, and Clark is like, why the fuck are you looking at me like that? And sort of that's when the seeds of doubt of like who the fuck is who starts happening. So they start going through the recovered Norwegian data, which shows that there was a location in which the Norwegians had discovered that they went and excavated. And so the Americans go, and we see this like very beautiful like matte painting thing of what.
Yeah.
It's very beautiful, but the first thought, and I don't know if anyone else thought this, it looks like the Millennium Falcon.
Yeah.
Oh my god!
It looks like it's from...
Bro, the Millennium Falcon is in this movie.
Guys, the Millennium Falcon.
So we have...
Just like what George Wood prophesized.
It shows this like partially buried alien spacecraft, as well as a smaller like dig site that looks like the shape of that ice block that we saw at the Norwegian site. And Norris, played by Charles Hallahan, he estimates that the alien ship had been buried here for at least 100,000 years, which is like, whoa. Whoa. And Blair then starts, as he is also looking through all of the Norwegian data, he runs a computer simulation which somehow in 1982 is perfectly able to predict the what the creature could assimilate, like how long it would take the creature to assimilate all life on Earth. Like it's perfectly able to predict that within like just a couple keystrokes.
Well, they got these fucking television graphics, so like why wouldn't they?
Yeah.
Dude, the ColecoVision.
Yeah. And Blair starts...
They got the Intellivision 3 before it even existed.
Yeah, but Blair starts growing very paranoid because the computer simulation tells him that it will only take like a few years. I believe like it says it in hours, but I think it like adds up to about like 3 years that the creature could assimilate all life on Earth. And he starts growing extremely paranoid. And Windows and Bennings take the original malformed body, humanoid body that they found at the Norwegian station, and they put it in storage. And they're like, oh, it's so gross. Oh, yucky. And then it is shown that this body that they thought was dead, I mean, they autopsied it and everything, starts leaking and bleeding.
Ew.
Yuck.
Yeah. And it's like, oh, gross. And Windows like literally like leaves the room for 3 seconds, and Bennings is in there by itself, and then he comes back and Bennings is like on the floor. It has like 3 different tongue tentacle things wrapped around Bennings, and is starting to assimilate Bennings. And Windows like freaks out and calls everybody in, and we see Bennings start like running out into the sort of like dark Antarctica, like I don't want to say wilderness because it's not the wilderness, but like
wasteland.
Cold.
Wasteland, yeah. He starts like kind of running out in there, and everybody sort of chases after him, and Mac, they kind of all surround him, Bennings, the Bennings thing, and it sort of like kind of falls to the ground because they injure it, and it falls to the ground, and as Mac knocks over a can of gasoline and goes to light it on fire, it releases this like screech,
like just like it like moans, but like
yeah,
it doesn't even sound inhuman, but it doesn't sound human either. It is
and
such
while
a
it's doing this
sound.
Yeah, it sounds like
this...
it kind of sounds like it's like a real human voice, but like kind of amplified and like edited in some way to make it like very. I don't know how the hell they even did it in 1982, but
yeah. And while it's like screaming, Peter Maloney as Bennings has this like no emotion on his face. Like he looks like he's like screaming in this like agonizing way, but there's just nothing on his face. And that's when, you know, MacReady burns it, and they sort of come to this realization. Like MacReady says, like, you know I'm human, and I think if you guys, like he says, like, I know I'm human, but, you know, I'm not sure about all of you, but I think I think all of you guys are human, because if you weren't, you would be attacking me right now. He's basically saying, like, you know, the thing is trying to assimilate and everything, so obviously it would be trying to attack, and he's like, I know I'm human, and blah, blah, blah. And then they notice that Blair is not there, and they're like, what the fuck, where's Blair? And then we cut to Blair running around, and he is sabotaging all of the vehicles, and he kills the remaining sled dogs, sadly, and he destroys the radio, with Windows is like in the room too, as Blair is kind of going at it. He's like destroying everything. He shoots at them and eventually runs out of bullets, and they eventually get him, and they sedate him, and they lock him up in a tool shed, and Copper, the doctor, suggests, like, hey, we have all this extra blood for, it's all of the each member's blood, we should test it against this uncontaminated blood that's held in storage. We should compare the blood. And they learn that the blood's been destroyed. But
what the
who
fuck?
Who could have destroyed the blood? Because the only person who has a key to the blood cabinet is Gary, the commander, and he only ever gives it to Copper. He only ever gives the key to Copper. And so that's when MacReady starts, he kind of sort of takes command fully at that point. And eventually then MacReady, Windows, and Knowles find Fuchs' burnt corpse just like laying out there in the cold wasteland. And they are they come to the conclusion that he committed suicide to avoid being assimilated by the thing, but he's like completely burnt and stuff, and they're just like, oh well, that kind of sucks, and they kind of move on.
Yeah.
And,
like, well.
Windows goes back to the base, and MacReady and Knowles go to check on, or no, they go and they investigate MacReady's shack, and then on their return, Knowles abandons MacReady because they found torn clothes in the shack. Knowles found torn clothes of MacReady's in the shack, and he brings that back to the rest of the people, and he's like, oh, I think MacReady's been assimilated. I think MacReady's the thing. And so the team is like debating whether or not they should let MacReady back inside and stuff. And MacReady breaks in, and he like has like a flare and dynamite, and he's like, you know, like,
He is
if you don't let
covered
me
in
back
frost.
he's covered in frost. Like, he is just covered in snow and frost.
He is like fucked up right now.
Yeah, and
he's so
during
crazy,
this,
crazy,
Yeah.
silly.
Yeah, and during this, Norris, who's played by Charles Hallahan again, he seems to suffer a heart attack, and actually dies. He sort of collapsed into the corner, and again, this is where it's like, this movie has this sequence of things where it's like very slow and quiet, and as they're going through things, they find, and then something big happens, like, they're all like trying to debate whether or not to let McCready inside, and then the sort of climax happens to that, which is Norris has a heart attack, and they all kind of stop, and they're like, oh fuck. And so they bring Norris into the rec room area of the base, and they start to Copper tries to defibrillate him, try to resuscitate him, and it's still, we've had some gory moments, with the dog mostly, but there hasn't been much going on in this movie.
Yeah.
It's not, too gory.
Yeah.
Well, then Copper, is defibrillating Norris, and his chest just transforms into a giant fucking mouth and bites off Copper's arms. And
it's something out of a Cronenberg film. It's disgusting.
It just bites off his arms, like rip them off. Copper dies because of just like his arms have been fucking bitten off by a chest. Like, that doesn't happen. So he dies.
And for the longest time, his scream that he has, for the longest time, it reminded me a lot of Eustace from Courage the Cowardly Dog. And so I always thought they're the same actor, but they're not.
No,
they're not the same actor at all. But it sounds like Eustace, when he's like fucking like terrified by anything.
Yeah, there's just screaming. There's like, the music kind of kicks in here like a little bit, but it's just chaos. There's a lot of screaming.
There's a lot of bubbling noises.
Yeah, there's a lot of bubbling noises as the Norse thing grows like a second head, and it like spindles up. It's like this long sort of thing, and it's like gnarly and everything, and it kind of goes up onto the ceiling, and McCready incinerates that, but its original fucking, like, Norris's original head detaches itself from Norris's body, and
it's so
then
violent.
Falls.
It just pulls itself off.
And you can see all the different like nerve endings and the skin just like ripping off and everything too. And
it's
so
nasty.
then, like, it's
and
gross.
like the green pus, it's just
there's like, you can see that he's been assimilated because he's just like all his insides have turned greenish, and the head kind of falls onto the floor. It uses the tongue to like grapple itself, and then it sprouts legs and it starts to like run away, and this sort of
it's like actually really funny.
It sort of starts like crawling away, and then it kind of gets like to the doorway, and McCready, like, with Kurt Russell, just has like nothing, like he looks tired. He just burns it with no like words, and so they everyone starts freaking out. They're like, oh my god, like, Norris was a fucking thing. How was Norris a thing? What the hell is going on? And they all start, like, freaking out. They're accusing one another. McCready's like, I'm fucking, like, I'm human and stuff. Like, I don't, like, how do we know I'm not? And, Child, like, they start accusing Childs, and Childs was like, I'm not fucking, because McCready's also like, we need to tie up different members and tie everybody else up, and he says, like, Childs, like, starts arguing back, and he's like, well, how do we know you're not the thing? And during this, Clark, like, has a scalpel, and he goes to attack Mac, and Mac, because he had a gun pointed at Charles, just turns and shoots him with no hesitation, like, at all. It was, like, so quick, that he literally goes from, like, pointing a gun at Childs to, like, pivoting 90 degrees and shooting Clark.
It's at this point that I took a note that the first Among Us comment was made, and that was from Will. Like, as soon as Clark dies, it's just silent for a bit, then Will just goes, oh my god, this is just like Among Us!
I was just about to fucking say that!
I'm sorry for stealing your line.
It's okay.
It's also at that point, like a little bit before that, I noticed that for like 15-20 minutes up to that point, we were not saying anything.
We were while we were
like
watching
just like
this,
it was like right
just...
after the thing, after Benny's thing was torched. Kurt Russell says the line, "Nobody trusts anybody now. We're all very tired." I wrote down after that I just realized we haven't been talking since then. Like after that scene, we just shut up.
Yeah. We're not saying like fucking anything to one another. It was, and that's kind of how the movie is. After McCready like originally says like no one trusts anybody, it goes on, and it's just like this long sequence of like holy shit, and it's sort of so he shoots Clark, and McCready hypothesizes that the Norris thing had demonstrated that every part of the thing is an individual life with its own survival instinct, meaning that if you were to threaten any part of an assimilated person that had a thing in it, it could become defenseless, try to defend itself. And so he hypothesizes that if we all take blood, if we all cut ourselves, and I like heat up this wire and I stick it in the blood, like that will make we will see a reaction from this. And this goes into this leads into my all-time favorite scene in a movie ever.
It is a phenomenal scene.
This is like when I think about the scene and I tell people about like why I love this movie, I bring up this part of the movie, because to me, I think if you're like an aspiring film creator or something, and you ever want to make like, you're like, how, what should I look to be inspired to make a sort of tense scene in my movie? Watch this scene, because it is the most tense scene. You have McCready, Gnarls, Palmer, and Childs and Gary, who are all and Windows, who are all tied up. I believe Windows and Gnarls are freed, but they are. You have Gary, Palmer, and Childs. They're tied up on the couch, and they go around. McCready starts getting blood from each and every one of them, and it's just this like, there's no sound other than this like haunting wind. There's no dialogue, and it's just silent.
Like when he tests the blood,
he heats up a piece of wire, he sticks it into this blood, and you hear like pew of
this,
like
fizzle, and this like squeaking against the plastic, and it's so unnerving. It's like nails on a chalkboard. It's this upsetting sound.
Yeah, so he starts with himself, and he says, like, I'm going to confirm what I already know. And it's confirmed that McCready is not a thing. They test Norris and Dr. Copper and Clark, and they... well, not Norris. Obviously, they don't test Norris. They know he's a thing. But they test Dr. Copper and Clark, and they both were not things. When he tests Clark's blood and it comes back that he was clean, Childs makes a comment saying like, well, now you're a murderer, because Clark was not bad, I guess. And so he makes a comment saying like, well, now you're a murderer. And Gnarls is not a thing. He is fine. And then they get to Palmer, and they're kind of like gotten into this routine of like testing the blood, heating up the wire, testing the blood, heating up the wire, and then they get to Palmer, and it's like they stick one little like he sticks the edge of the fucking heated up wire in it, and it freaks out. The like blood starts bubbling.
You
jumps
you also
off the table.
missed that, like, before that, like, no one's really speaking, and just
there's no dialogue.
Just beforehand, I forget who it is who says it, but someone says something, and then it cuts to this shot. Like, I think it's Gary. I think Gary says something, and then about how McCready says, like, I knew you'd like say something like that. This is why I'm going to test you last. And then he touches it, and then immediately just jumps.
Yeah, he says something about, I think Gary mentions, like, being commander and everything. And he's like, yeah, I'll test you last or something. And then he just, like, very, like, nonchalantly goes to stick the wire in the fucking Petri dish, and it just explodes. And during the sequence, too, Palmer just starts shaking and is, like, he's just rattling himself out. And it's terrifying. Because he's just... The actor who plays Palmer has, like, no, like... He doesn't have any, like, facial expression, but he just starts shaking. And he breaks out of his bonds, and his head sort of, like, goes, like, it starts melting, and you see, like, the skull and everything.
Like the sides of his skull and shit.
Yeah, and it starts peeling off. His hands start turning into these weird, like, tentacle type things, and then he shoots himself up into, like, the Palmer thing kind of shoots itself up into the ceiling, and McCready's trying to, like, incinerate him, and Gary and Childs are fucking freaking out because they were sitting next to Palmer this whole time, and so they start freaking out, and they're like, oh my god, and McCready's flamethrower isn't working, so he's, like, yelling at Windows to incinerate Palmer, and Windows kind of freezes and doesn't do anything, and everyone's, like, screaming, so you go from this really quiet moment to just fucking chaos again, and Palmer thing, like, splits in half and creates this sort of new fucking mouth, to which it attacks Windows. Windows then goes in head first. So you sort of have, like, the Palmer thing, and then you have Windows, like, inside the Palmer thing, and it starts, like, eating Windows.
Windows' body and legs are shaking. You can just hear Windows screaming. There's blood spraying everywhere. And I got sick. I have seen this movie before, and I felt genuinely nauseous. Because it's just incredibly gross thing. Everybody's just screaming. Like, everyone's screaming in fear. Windows is screaming in pain. This creature's just making noise. There's blood everywhere. It's being thrown around. Everything's breaking. It is sensory overload. It's such a good scene, but I, like, felt nauseous.
Yeah, and it part of the reason why, too, is, like, you come from this just quiet. Again, there's not really any dialogue except for a few, like, quips made by the characters. There's not a lot said. There's not a lot of, like, sort of music other for, like, very quick, like, synth notes, and then wind and stuff, and that's just all you hear. And then suddenly, like, the Palmer thing just, like, explodes, like, literally explodes, and it's instant chaos. And so finally McCready is able to get a flamethrower, and he kills the Palmer thing, and there's, like, kind of this, like, lull and stuff, like, holy shit, and then Windows starts incinerating as well, and it's kind of sad because you see, like, Windows's, like, crumpled up body in the corner just, like, slowly start turning into the thing, and you're like, holy shit, like,
Yeah.
because Windows hadn't really done anything, like, something that's, like, I think perfectly kind of shown throughout this movie is that, like, these characters haven't really done anything to deserve this. Like, they all kind of, like, hate each other and are, like, very stressed out and stuff, and they all kind of, like, accuse one of another, but there's no really, like, bad person of this fucking cast other than Blair, who's, like, not a part of the scene. And the only reason why Blair is bad is because he fucking, like, got paranoid and didn't want the thing infesting the rest of humanity, which is not, like, a bad thing. Like, yeah, he was like, yeah, it kind of sucks that he destroys, you know, all of the equipment and everything, but also, like, he was, in his mind, saving the rest of the fucking world from being assimilated by the thing. So they all finally he tests Child's blood after they kill Windows. McCready tests Child's blood, and it's revealed that, like, Child's is not a thing, and Child starts, like, kind of freaking out. He's like, let me out of this fucking, like, untie me right now, and stuff, and it does this very funny cut where he's, like, screaming, and he's freaking out. He's like, get me the fuck out, like, untie me right now, and then it cuts to just Gary sitting on the couch by himself, tied up, and the Knowles, Childs, and McCready are staring at Gary as they test Gary's blood, and Gary is just kind of sitting there and throughout this kind of whole film, Gary has been very stoic. He hasn't shown a lot of emotion other than he seems to be very, like, concerned, and he has screamed, obviously, during, like, the big moments and stuff, but he hasn't really, like, been, like, this sort of, I don't know how to describe it, like, he's been quiet-ish, and he says one of my favorite lines in the movie. He says, you know, like, gentlemen, I know we've been through a lot, but if you can find the time, I would rather not spend the rest of this winter tied to this fucking couch. And
it's such a good delivery.
Yeah, because he's, like, so calm. He's like, gentlemen, I know, you know, we've been through a lot, but if you could find the time, and I would rather not spend the rest of this winter tied to this fucking couch. So
it's really funny.
It really is. And so they untie him, and they go to say, like, oh, the last person that we need to test is Blair. And they had checked on Blair a little bit earlier, which leads to one of my other favorite scenes where Blair is just, like, I forgot to bring this up, but yeah, so they go to check on Blair, and Blair is just kind of sitting there huddled, like, in the tool shed. They, like, open a window, and they're like, how you doing, Blair? And it just, like, shows him through the window, sitting there, like, over a can of beans, and next to him is a noose that he made. And he's just, like, he just stares at McCready, and he's like, I would like to come inside now. I'm feeling better now.
It's really funny.
And it's really
so goddamn funny.
And Wilford Brimley just does an excellent delivery of that, of just, like, he's like in the middle of eating out of a can, and he just, like, turns and he goes, I would like to come inside now. And it's like,
God.
But so
I will say, at this point, I think, I love this film. I honestly think after that scene, that blood test scene, starts my I think my basically only flaw with the film, and that scene is just this masterclass of tension and fear, so much so that it is such this excess of stress relief. Every single time I find it hard to focus on the final, like, 10-15 minutes of the film. And so the rest of it just kind of, like, bleeds out of my head. Not to say that the rest of that isn't great, it's just really hard for me to focus after a scene of that magnitude. It's like, my brain just, like, I, like, start to, like, disassociate almost. I'm like, until like the end happens. I'm like, oh yeah, wait, this movie's over? What?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what maybe they were going for, because I think that's how the actors portray themselves as well. It's like you get that line from Gary who's like, I would rather not spend the rest of the winter tied to the fucking couch, and they're kind of just like, oh fuck yeah, Blair, we should go test Blair's blood, you know, we should go fucking check on him. And they so they go to check on him, and they find that he's escaped, and he's dug this like tunnel, and he's been using vehicle components to assemble a small flying saucer.
What the fuck?
And they're like, oh, what the fuck? Well, okay. So they go back to Childs, who was left on guard. And Childs is missing, and the power generator is destroyed, and Mac speculates that the thing is intending to return to hibernation until a rescue team arrives to rescue whatever is left. And so MacReady, Gary, and Knowles decide, you know what we're gonna do is that we're just going to fucking we're going to explode the entire fucking station. And like we're gonna get all the explosive that we for some reason have. Again, they're supposed to be a group of scientists. Why do they have all these explosives? I guess like maybe it could make sense for excavation, but like again,
yeah,
they just have all this military equipment. So they go and they start planting all of the explosive devices, and are as they are sort of like going underground and throughout the base, Blair kind of pops up and kills Gary, and then Knowles disappears as well, and the
at this also point, we have no idea where Childs is.
We have no clue where Childs went. He sort of just disappeared while he was on guard. We have no clue where he went. And so Knowles also kind of disappears. It's assumed that he is also then killed. And the Blair thing sort of transforms into this fucking ginormous ass creature that like, it's just like, when it kills Gary, it puts his hand in Gary's face, and I mean that both like metaphorically, or in the sense of like when you put your hand on somebody's face, but also literally in the sense that he puts his hand on the face and it starts morphing into Gary's face.
Yeah.
And like it asphyxiates him because like he's covering like his mouth and his nose, and it just starts like going into his face. So yeah, Knowles is killed off screen then, and there's this like scene where MacReady kind of like looks like he discovers Knowles has disappeared, and then there's this scene where something underground like lifts up all the floorboards, and this like fucking tentacle grabs the detonator, for all the
as soon as you said that, I got the song Something Underneath by Clipping stuck in my head. Which is just this song about like the dead just like rising from like underground, and it's just like,
I mean that kind of is similar, yeah, because
yeah, it also just like reminds, the instrumental does a lot because it's just like very low, just droning,
yeah, and this like giant, it's like literally just like a fucking giant alien monster. It's like slimy.
Dog bursts out of its chest.
Yeah, you see like part of a dog, you see like some faces, and it destroys the detonator, and MacReady has a stick of dynamite, and he's like, I think he says like, fuck you, or I I don't know what I can't remember what exactly he says. Yeah, okay, I provided. He says, he grabs, like, a stick of dynamite as, like, the thing is, like, you see, like, all these, like, different dog, like, looking creatures popping out of its, like, side and out of its front, and it's, like, becoming into this, like, giant monster, and it roars at MacReady, and MacReady just, like, picks up a stick of dynamite and goes, yeah, fuck you too! And he throws the stick of dynamite at the, thing, and explodes.
Yeah.
And so they he triggers the rest of the explosives by throwing that, and it destroys the base, and we're just left with MacReady, and he's kind of just like sitting and with like the base just like burning around him. There's like not a lot of like music. It's mostly just like this silent with like you can hear the like bass being like burnt down, and every like stuff is falling, and MacReady's just kind of like sitting there by himself, and then Childs returns, and MacReady's like, where the fuck were you? And Childs explains that he got lost while he was in the storm while trying to find Blair.
He got lost.
He got lost. He says that he noticed Blair like escaping, and he went and chased after him, and that's why they didn't find him again. And it's slowly, the movie ends with just the two of them kind of just like staring at one another, and they're exhausted.
Fruity.
And they kind of just yeah. And they kind of just acknowledge, like, there's no point in being distrustful of one another at this point. And so they just share, like, a bottle of scotch. And then it, like, pans out slowly. And then it fades to black and credits roll.
Yeah.
And that's
the thing.
And that's the thing. And you're sort of left with this feeling of who the fuck are either of them human? Are either of them, like, who... And it's gone on to a point where, like, there's many different answers. I've seen, like, John Carpenter say you can very clearly see one of them breathing and one of them not. Like, I believe, like, Keith David says something that kind of says that he was Childs was human and Mac wasn't. And so you're kind of just left with this, like, feeling of dread, which is how this movie is. It is just a feeling of dread. And again, is this just nihilistic, unhappy movie? Because there's no happy ending. You don't get, like, you know, a funny little, like, oh, they're fine, like, here comes the helicopter over the mountain coming to rescue them. No, it is left off with two exhausted, like, people who are just like, there's no point in, like, being distrustful of one another because we're both in the fucking, like, Antarctic wasteland. We just destroyed the base that we were staying at. There's, like, we are either going to freeze or starve to death before anything. Like, there's no point in being distrustful of one another. And that, so you just have that's the end of the movie. And I think I really like the sort of I like the sort of ambiguity. Oh my god, ambiguity. I'm so sorry. Ambiguity of the ending to this movie, because really, like, what the fuck happened, you know? And
what happened?
What happened? There is so many points of that movie where you are watching this and you're just like, what the fuck is like, what happened? Like, why'd this happen? Like, again, like with Fuchs's body, like, that death is never explained other than they think he killed himself because he didn't want to become a thing, but like the way his body looks, like he's like completely charred and dead. There is no explanation in this movie about the Norwegians other than they found this fucking like spaceship and they excavated it and unknowingly.
Now you say this movie. Are you telling me that there's another movie?
No.
Okay.
Not at all. No,
Okay.
There's no the thing about the thing is that it ends here. There's nothing else.
Okay.
Okay.
That's like really good to know.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
really great to know. Ignore
I'll
how in
believe
20 to be clear, there is a lot more, obviously. Like, eventually this movie has been sort of it found an audience on the home video and television, sort of like when it was released on home video and television, and so in the subsequent years of this movie's release, it has gained a cult following. And I don't even want to say that it's gained a cult following. I think it's just gained the audience that it's deserved.
It has, as I'm looking right now, hold on. This, if not just gained a cult following, I think it has gained a following in general, because this is the, 161 highest rated movie on IMDb.
Mm-hmm.
It is the 65th highest rated narrative film on Letterboxd, with like a 4.3 out of 5.
Mm-hmm.
This movie, like, it ages like a fine wine.
Yeah, and it did, spawn a lot of. There is a 1982 novelization. There's been a lot of like haunted like house attractions that have been themed about it. There are sequels in comic book form. There is a 2002 video game that
and
is
there is not a 2011 prequel to
there
this
is
movie.
not a 2012 or 2011 prequel. But there is, unfortunately.
However, if it did exist, it would probably star Mary Elizabeth Winstead. But that it would be if it existed, and it doesn't.
Yeah, if it existed, if it was a thing that humans
If
made.
it was a
If it
thing.
was a thing.
Just to very briefly touch on that and why we're kind of like hesitant to bring it up is that the biggest problem with that is that they try to fill in the kind of plot holes, I guess you can describe them, that this movie has, but they're not really plot holes in the first place because it's supposed to be like you don't know what the fuck is happening, and so you have this movie that comes up and they are making a prequel and stuff, and so it focuses on the Norwegian people, and one of the biggest points of this movie and one of the biggest like things about this movie is the special effects. It is considered like a fucking
Masterclass.
a masterclass and like a benchmark in special effects makeup and stuff, and Rob Bottin like did an excellent job on using practical effects and using like mechanical parts and puppetry and everything to create the creature, the thing. And when they made the 2011 prequel, they did originally have it be a movie that primarily used practical effects and using these who were creative, Tom Woodruff Jr. and Alec Gillis of Amalgamated Dynamics created practical effects, and they spent a long time working on those practical effects, and they like made a monster suit. They used cable operated animatronics to give it more of an organic film. Like, you could tell that they cared about the movie, and they really like loved working with that as movies. But then they as post-production was happening, I guess at some point the producers or whoever said no to that version of the movie that uses like all of these non or practical effects, non CGI and everything scenes. And while there is apparently a version of the film that has those practical effects remained intact, most of those practical effects were then done digitally and were replaced in post-production. I believe also like they were like done very quickly, so it looks horrible. And there are like maybe a couple times where you can, even with the CGI, it doesn't look that bad, but there are so many points in that movie that it looks horrible and it takes you out of it. And it's so upsetting to think that they spent all this time and then the movie like I don't know who just was like, nah, make it all CGI. And that movie did horrible, which is unfortunate because I think there's some other problems with the movie and the writing and stuff, but I think if they, you know, maybe worked with John Carpenter or worked with the original people who worked on the 1982 film, it would have been a bit better. But, you know, you live and you learn. And
like Sonic Adventure.
Like Sonic Adventure. No. I still think, though, even with the sort of that movie not doing as well, I think this movie is just such a great example of a horror movie being dreadful. And what I like to, like, I love horror. I love the wacky, goofy horror, you know, you get with some horror comedy and things like that. I love like funny events in this movie, but I think this movie kind of also points out what I really love about horror. And it's like, when you watch a movie, you're sort of watching it to sort of get away from like real life events. And I guess like when I watch a horror movie, I want to be so captivated by what is happening in that horror movie that I forget about the real life horrors of the real world. And when I watch The Thing, I'm just like transported to the fucking base, and I'm like, what the fuck is going on? Why is there a big alien? What the fuck is happening? And I think that's why I like it. And like Lucy, like you were saying, like after that big huge buildup that you have for the last quarter of this movie, you're sort of left like this sort of dissociated fact. And that's what I like about this movie, because I think that's what they were kind of going for, like with the ending where you have McCready and Childs sort of tired and they're sort of resigning to the fact that probably one of them is the Thing. They're gonna die here, and it just fades to black, and that's the end of the movie. And I think the feeling you're supposed to have during this movie is that you have this like huge build up to the blood testing scene, and it's chaos and it's fucking insane, and then the rest of the movie you're kind of just sitting there like, holy shit, like what the fuck. And then by the time that you get to the end of the movie, you're kind of just tired and exhausted, and there's nothing. You're kind of left with this feeling in yourself of just like, there's nothing I can do, you know?
Yeah.
It's kind of an achievement that this film makes you feel tired with it's not even an hour, 2 hours long.
Yeah, it sort of just like, I think, builds up to that point of the movie, and it gets to just like that section where it's just chaos, and then you're just kind of left like, exhausted. And it's a tough movie to watch, and I can maybe see why people in 1982, when they went to go see this movie, maybe previously having seen E.T. or some other sci-fi movie, probably ended up not liking it, because like, you're left feeling pretty like shitty. You're not given a conclusion, really. You're given two characters who are resigned to the fact that they're gonna die, and there is no happy ending. There is no helicopter coming to save McCready and Childs. There is no like cure that's found. There's nothing. And that it sort of also it begs the question of, hey, if one of them is the thing and they are rescued, like if they are able to survive, and do what Blair was trying to do, what the fuck happens to the rest of the world? And I think that's just genius, and I think that's a great example of a horror movie. A horror movie to me is you're left alone with this feeling of dread.
Yeah.
You
just kind of feel like empty after it.
Yeah. And yeah, like, I love the goofy wackiness of horror that can happen. I grew up with but I got into horror with like, I watched The Twilight Zone as a kid with my dad, and those sort of give off the same, like, The Twilight Zone kind of gives off that same feeling of, oh fuck, like, something bad has happened and there's no resolution, and holy shit, I'm Rod Sterling, wasn't that fucked up? And so yeah, I what were your guys' like more thoughts on the movie, I guess, too? Because Will, this was the first time you've ever seen this movie.
Yeah.
What was your kind of thoughts?
I thought it was a very it's kind of hard to put into words. It's like
Mm-hmm. Did you like it?
I definitely did. It's definitely like, it definitely reads me as like a classic film, and just sort of the vibe of it. It's very much of that golden, not really golden age, but like, it's clearly done by someone who was, or done by a team of like very, very skilled people, like very not exactly experienced, but like
they were like really passionate about
very passionate, very excited to work on something with this large in scope.
I mean, even like I was saying, like, Rob Bottin was 22 when he started on this movie, and he literally worked himself to the point of being hospitalized. So you can kind of tell that there was like a passion, because they also like described that like it was part of the reason why he kind of overworked himself was he wanted this attention to detail that was like a lot. Like, he wanted there to be just the nastiness of the fucking movie, and I think that's achieved really well. Is the fucking disgustingness of this movie is the creature design just being something that is just like, oh, what the fuck,
And alongside the creature design, I feel like the script is also very detailed.
I think it is really carried by the cast. I think Kurt Russell, Abel for Brimley, Keith David, Donald Moffat just do an incredible job in portraying these men who are isolated, and there is nothing like they are isolated, and then suddenly this happens and they have no way to tell any outside people. Like, there's no way to contact the rest of the, like, world. You know, there's no way to get help and stuff. And so I think they do an excellent job, like, sort of showing, like, McCready kind of, like, shows, like, a person trying to step into the leadership role. Gary shows this, like, person who was the leader who's sort of resigned to the fact that, like, maybe he's blaming himself. Blair shows the paranoia that could happen with something like this. And yeah, so I just think this is a good movie. It's such a good movie.
It's great. I love this movie. It's great.
It's really great.
But yeah, that was The Thing, 1982, directed by John Carpenter. If you liked this, please stay tuned to our next couple of episodes, which are going to be Lucy and Will's favorite horror movies. Lucy, you'll be covering Saw.
Yes, I will be covering Saw.
Yes. And then Will, who, like we've mentioned, doesn't really watch horror movies, but still is going to be covering Monster House. So you get you get the first two episodes, you get The Thing by John Carpenter, you get Saw, very iconic movies, and then you can take a break with Monster House, which is still very scary, and I'm very excited.
Watching it again recently, I was like, this is realizing this is a kid's film was like shit.
Like, yeah, you're kind
I remember,
of like, holy fuck.
I never even watched it as a kid. I'll go into it, like, when we get into, like, the episode, because I never watched this as a kid, but yeah.
But it's
great
still...
films. Honestly, one of the main reasons why we started this podcast was also to show Will more horror films, because you mentioned before that you've wanted to get into horror.
Yeah, definitely.
And me and Lucy have both... I grew up watching horror adjacent things. I grew up, like, watching... like I said, the Twilight Zone, and I also watched Courage the Cowardly Dog, and a lot of other...
I grew up a fucking little piss baby.
And, yeah, so both me and Lucy definitely have, like, a special interest and hyper-focus on horror, and we'll be in, like, group conversations with our friends, and we'll just, like, go off on about horror movies, and nobody else understands what we're fucking talking about. And Will kind of was just like, could I join? I want to know more about horror movies. I want to get into horror. And we were like, okay.
Yeah, fuck yeah, dude. Hell yeah. Yeah, you're great. I'm, like, really excited for this podcast and what we're gonna do.
Yeah. I've already learned so fucking much. Like, this is awesome.
Yeah. So we hope that if anyone is listening, that you continue listening, and make sure to follow us on Twitter at horrors4, the number 4 horror, is our current only social media. I will one day make more social media, but currently we have a Twitter, and our first tweet is about how we hate NFTs. So
you can thank me for that.
Thank you too.
Fuck NFTs. All cops are bastards. Trans rights are human rights. Black Lives Matter. Stop Asian hate. Free Palestine. All that good shit.
Hell yeah. So follow us on there for updates, and we hope to see you in the next episode. Bye.
Bye.
I should have maybe thought of an outro to fuck. Oh well.